Let's see. I guess we can go ahead and get started. It's 3 o'clock. So, hello everybody, and welcome to Multiplayer Networking and You. Yay. It is possible. You can make a multiplayer game. Don't let people tell you that you can't. There are some forbidden secrets. By the end of this talk, you will be fully equipped to start your multiplayer journey. No cheats, real multiplayer, just like you see in real games. In this talk, we're going to cover the fundamental concepts of multiplayer that span across all engines, some different tools that are available for you to use. Some are Unity specific. And also I'm going to cover how networking works in Unreal Engine compared to how it works in Unity. To kind of summarize that, it's invisible magic. And also I'm going to go over some different things I've learned. Pain and suffering. So, a little bit about me. I graduated from Southern Arkansas University in 2020 with a game art degree. I am an animator and 3D modeler, and I am a self-taught programmer. I formerly was a gameplay engineer at Asteri Networks, and I'm currently employed as an art pipeline engineer at Decoy Games. I am an independent game developer, and I founded a game development group called Out of Bounds Playground. And at Out of Bounds Playground, we are working on 2 different multiplayer games, Malicious Mages and Light 'em Up. So on Malicious Mages, I am the solo dev, and I contract artists, as well as make a lot of the art myself. And it has Capture the Flag multiplayer gameplay. Light 'em Up, we have a small team of 6 artists, devs, and a designer. And it's got hide and seek multiplayer gameplay. Both of these games are in active development. So, let's talk about the concepts behind multiplayer. Repeat after me. You cannot retroactively add multiplayer to a game.
You cannot retroactively add multiplayer to a game.
Thank you. I wasn't sure if anybody was actually going to do that. So, you can, but it would be really hard. So the concepts behind multiplayer are so core to its functionality that your game has to be built with it from the ground up. Not doing so would result in massive technical debt and bugs. Multiplayer functions all the way down to the lowest level of your game. You cannot add it as a top layer. Malicious Mages was rewritten 3 times because of this. It's much better to start from scratch. So here on this diagram, apologize for the swearing. This was I built Malicious Mages on a single player concept, local multiplayer, and I wanted to make it online. And I was like, I can just add the networking multiplayer after, it's fine. So I made this diagram of like how I could possibly do that, and it quickly turned into this like massive spaghetti chart that I call the multiplayer fuck hell shit. And it was not fun. Eventually, I just got so frustrated that I gave up and decided to completely rewrite it. Actually, no, I didn't decide to rewrite it. I worked on an entirely different game, Light 'em Up, to where I then learned all that I need to know about making multiplayer, and I'm taking what I've learned and applying it to that game. So, you need to change how you think about gameplay engineering. Multiplayer is illusion magic. Is the other player in the room with us right now? No, they're not. But we need to trick people into thinking that they are. Everyone has their own copy of the game. We just need to tell other people what we're doing in ours. It's kind of like parallel universes. Everybody is in their own separate universe, and you need to sync what's going on in those universes among the other players. You, as the client, only need to care about certain things like where are the other players, not how much ammo they have or just different things about them. You only need to worry about your own ammo. So, for example, in this example, we see a grenade landing next to our local player that explodes and downs them. If this were a single player game, this would be a physics object on your machine bouncing towards you, and when it detonates, it does this like sphere cast calculation to determine whether or not you as the player take damage or how much damage you take, etc., etc. But in a multiplayer sense, only the person who threw the grenade is likely doing that calculation. They already know who they hit. They tell the server to then tell that person to take damage, and then they tell them where the grenade went, and they tell them to play an explosion effect to visually represent this explosion. Whoever threw that grenade does that calculation. Yeah.
You explaining that makes hackers in video games make 10 times more sense now.
Yeah.
Like those guys where they just pull the trigger and they kill everyone in the lobby. That makes 10 times.
That's why security in multiplayer games is so hard, is because of those concepts. So we can kind of boil this down to a famous line from The Matrix: there is no spoon. There was no calculated explosion. Somebody else did that explosion. We just knew an explosion took place there, who got hurt, and we know to put a particle effect there. And we call it a day. Client authority. Whoa, grenade be upon ye. Both players connected to this game are considered clients. People connected to the server. Objects in multiplayer games have a concept of ownership and authority. The client who threw that grenade at me owns that grenade. He controls where it goes and knows who it hits. But he doesn't directly control the people who it hit. He needs to ask permission for them to take damage. That's it. Client-server communication. I threw a grenade at him. He needs to take damage. Please, Mr. Server, stab him. Okay. That guy killed you, by the way. And this guy's just sitting all smug. The client can only communicate to other clients by passing information across the server. The server acts as a middleman. How did the Soyjack tell the server? How did the Soyjack tell the server to damage the other player? He used a server command. Server commands are actions that take place on the server that are called by the client. It's like a request for something to happen. Then there's client RPCs, remote procedure call. The server then uses an RPC to tell everyone what's going on. This allows the server to tell every client to run a specific command. The server is pretty much saying, hey, everyone, just so you know, an explosion happened here, so you should spawn a particle effect. It's like the really annoying @everyone's in Discord. Target RPC. A target RPC is when the server tells a specific client to do something. No other client connected besides that specific client will know about that action. You could use this to send a message to a specific client, or like, that guy specifically, there's something happening to him. Screw you specifically. So, some different things to keep in mind. RPCs can only be called by the server. A client cannot force an RPC. The client must issue a command. That command is processed by the server, and then the server issues that RPC. You should separate your code between what happens on the client and what happens on the server. So, to recap, the other player is not actually in the room with you. You cannot directly talk to him or share any information about the game. The server is a middleman between you and the other clients and is in charge of telling everyone what's going on and keeping everyone in sync. This fundamentally changes how you would typically approach programming gameplay mechanics, and it must be built from the ground up with this concept in mind. So you can look at this chart here. We have 4 different players connected to the game. This client sends a command to the server processes that command and sends an RPC to tell everyone, even including the person who sent that command, what happened. Or, if just one client needs to know about what happened, it sends a target RPC. Let's briefly talk about the scary under-the-hood stuff. So, types of network connections. There's peer-to-peer. 2 or more players are directly connected to each other over the internet, and one host player acts as the server. You can see the diagram on the right. It's computer-to-computer connection. It is a web of computers. Or there's dedicated servers, client-server connection. A server exists on the network running the game that all players connect to. Transports and NAT types. To do multiplayer, you have to be able to connect to one another. If you could do that easily, the internet would be a very insecure place. Transports are services that establish connections between clients. NAT types, network address translation, are a layer between your computer and your router that acts as a layer of security and masks your IP address. To establish a direct connection between other computers without port forwarding, you need to break through that NAT barrier through a process called NAT hole punching. Transports do this for you, directly connecting you to your destination. Determinism and rollback. Determinism is a concept in networking that allows for every user to experience the same state when given the same inputs. So what that means is every user's game state is the same. The entire frame is synced across the network. Everything down to the physics is synced. This allows for rollback gameplay, typically used for fighting games or fast-paced gameplay. Because everything is synced, we can predict what happens next. If it's correct, we proceed. If not, because of lag, we roll back the game to the current game state. This benefits gameplay in fighting games because only the user with the bad connection is affected. You have satellite internet, you get to lag. So, some different tools available. And again, these are pretty Unity specific. We'll actually start with some resources. Most game engines have networking solutions. These are tools developed to handle all of the really scary back-end connection stuff so you can just focus on making a video game. Transports are available, those things that establish those connections, for these solutions to make players just connect without having to set up servers for that peer-to-peer connection. Some of these solutions also offer server hosting. Sometimes they're free for a limited number of concurrent users, or you have to pay for hosting. This just allows you to, within your game, just connect to each other through servers because they're hosting it for you. So with multiplayer networking, forum posts are your best friends. Typically, if you have a question, someone else has it too. I have learned, though, that network engineers can be really mean. Don't let them bother you. I don't know why specifically, but some of the most hateful forum posts I've seen have come from network engineering discussions. Don't be this guy. Ignore him. So this guy was in a forum saying, how do I make a peer-to-peer network game? Pretty vague question, yeah, to be honest. But this guy said, if you're asking questions like, can I make a game with peer-to-peer multiplayer? It means you're not ready. No, you are ready. Ask any questions you want. You can't be ready unless you ask those questions. Multiplayer's hard, but you have all of the resources you need to break through and ask those questions and get in there. So ask the dumb questions all the time. So some different transports. Mirror networking, formerly UNet. Mirror is the networking solution that I have used the most. It's not the cleanest solution. It has a lot of quirks, but it has significant documentation, and there's lots of tutorials around it. So they took Unity's old built-in abandoned networking tool called UNet, and they continued working on it, fixing a whole bunch of bugs and adding features. It's open source, and lots of community-created tools for it exist, like Steamworks integration to just automatically use Steam's networking tools to your advantage with it. And just a lot of different tools. There's Photon Fusion, which is a pretty clean networking tool, allows for online hosting of concurrent users. Lots of built-in tools, lots of tutorials. I myself haven't used it much, but I have a lot of friends who have, and they always recommend it 100%. Really, it's just there's a lot of them. You just got to find the best one that works for you, do your research, look and see. Then there's Photon Quantum. This allows for deterministic rollback netcode in Unity. And this is so special and powerful because it is extremely hard to do determinism and rollback in Unity because it does not have a deterministic physics engine. This works as a separate engine running alongside Unity. It recently became free to access and build with. It's kind of a pain because it works as that separate engine running alongside it. So you have to handle both of those at once and keeping it deterministic, but it allows for rollback in Unity, which is a godsend. So let's talk about the differences between Unreal Engine and Unity. So before I get into this, I have not used Unreal Multiplayer. I wanted to include some details here because it is the current hotness, with all of the Unity drama going on. I know so many people that are jumping ships to different engines, and I wanted to keep this talk as kind of generic as possible for you to use these concepts with whatever path you decide to take. So I interviewed a friend of mine who's used Unity Unreal Engine multiplayer a lot. And I got a lot of tips from him on how it differs from Unity. So if you are currently in the process of switching from Unity to Unreal, I hope this helps. And again, this is me interviewing him and not using it and taking the information. So take this as you will. But Unreal Engine was built with multiplayer in mind from the ground up. All of its functionality is set up to sync across clients natively. They have it set up to where, as you're making functionality for a single-player game, it can pretty easily be synced across the network. So they have this concept of game mode and game state, which allows for just setting up rules for the game. If you're making a first-person shooter with deathmatch or capture the flag, they have that as a concept just already built into Unreal Engine. But when setting up multiplayer, it's already set up for that game mode to be synced across the network for everybody to already know what game mode we're playing. Game state is the state of that game mode, your score or, some different things about the game mode that you need to sync, and that is also synced across the network. Then object references. So in Unity, you cannot send object references directly across the network. From my experience using Mirror and from what I've heard from other networking solutions or just networking in general, I can't just immediately tell you to access a cube or I want you to know that something is happening to that cube, just so you know. I can't just do that immediately. What I have to do typically in Unity multiplayer setups is you and the other client both have a manager that keeps track of all these objects with indexes that are synced. And we know which index relates to that cube. So I send you that index so you know I'm talking about the cube. This is because everyone has their own copy of the object. There's no way to send that reference to that object because every client treats it differently. Unless we send that index. You can only send simple data types like floats, strings, ints. In Unreal, because it's built from the ground up for multiplayer, you can just send an object across the network and the clients will just know what object you're talking about. That's because whatever ID pointing to that object is already synced across the network. We already know which object we're talking about. So that kind of covers just a little bit about how Unreal's set up and how it differs. Here's some different things I've learned while learning multiplayer design over the last couple of years. Patterns. Whatever networking solution you decide to use, you'll eventually develop a list of patterns or techniques that help you do different things while developing your network game. It's important to keep track of these patterns and keep them for reference. You could also do research and find typical patterns that others have used. This is a pattern that I put together that I use a million times in Mirror networking to just quickly do a client RPC and syncing something across the network. So I just have this function call and I pass in whatever argument. It checks if it's the server, it does the RPC, because remember, you cannot call an RPC unless you're the server. Unless, if you're not the server, it then calls a command to then tell the server, hey, do that RPC. Test. Test as often as you possibly can. Test locally on your computer with every change and run the game twice on your computer, simulating two different clients talking to each other. Just because it works on the host player doesn't mean it's going to work on the client. A lot of people here have tested Light 'em Up with me, and we've seen a lot of really horrible bugs because, testing locally can only take you so far. When you bring your friends in to test the game in an actual environment across the network, it brings so much more light on what you're trying to see. Because you're testing locally, connections happen instantly. It's not going across the network. It's going either from your computer to a router to your computer or just on your computer to your computer. You're not keeping track of the delay it would take for those connections to happen, or like packet loss, or you really have to test it in a real environment as much as you can, because lots of weird different behavior can happen. Also, Steam requires 2 computers to test. So this is something that they don't mention a lot and has been a huge pain point to me, and I wanted to share it. If you're using Steam networking, or like pretty much most hosting services, if I'm not mistaken, the only way to properly test it is to have 2 separate computers with 2 Steam accounts. You cannot have 2 Steam accounts running on the same computer. To properly test Steam functionality, like if you're checking profile pictures or names, like a lot of people here who've played Light 'em Up know that the profile pictures, I see all of you smiling, the profile pictures are so broken because it is so hard for me to test, because I need like 3 or 4 computers to test, which I just don't always have ready access available to it. So to test like whatever hosting service functionality, you need to be prepared to test that. Like, get your buddies, annoy the hell out of them. Like, hey, can you please just connect to this, and just, okay, it's broken. All right, thank you. Can you connect to it now? It's still broken? All right, awesome. Create dev tools to help you test. In a typical multiplayer game, you have to go through many menus to connect. When you're testing locally on one machine, you don't need to jump through that many hoops unless you're testing those hoops. To get into development testing quickly, write a series of tools that do all of that lobby setup stuff automatically to just get into the game and test. In Light 'em Up, we have a secret dev environment that automatically sets up a local network game. So I just hit that button, it creates 2 fake users, sets up a lobby, connects to the game just like that. So I can just get in there and do it. Afraid of bugs? You are going to experience some of the craziest, most frustrating bugs you will ever find as you initially learn how to do networking. If you stick with it, fix those bugs as they appear, and keep going, you'll eventually be fine. You have to stick through the pain. Multiplayer is wizard magic. That's why the process can be painful, but the end result is some of the most fun I have ever had making games, and it's totally worth it. Stick with it and make cool shit. Any questions?
How many years off my life is multiplayer going to take?
Goodbye.
Good question. Let me get back to you on that. I've developed a couple gray hairs. No, it's really worth it though. The pain is temporary.
Yeah.
So.
In a little bit.
Anybody else? Nope.
Oh, actually, hold on. We're talking about.
No, I was just thinking, like, I don't know how to phrase it. You're talking about how, like, engines had to be built from the ground up with multiplayer in mind. Is that why certain game engines, like, let's just say, like, the Blam engine for Halo and whatnot, like, it's just so, like, rock solid. Like, Halo 1, 2, and 3 was just so solid because it was made from the ground up to be multiplayer.
Yeah.
Lots of physics in mind, like, lots of, like, debris flying around, the debris can kill you.
Right. Yeah, I mean, again, this is just speculation, but I would probably make a good bet that Halo was built with that from the ground up, which is why they were able to reuse this engine so many times for so many different titles, branching it out. And again, like, even if your engine that you're using is not built for it, you can then make the framework that your game is being built off from the engine built for it to then, make what you need to make for it. That's why, like, even if your engine's not built for it, as long as your game was built from the ground up, you'll be fine.
The reason that Unreal is nice to work with for networking is context.
Yeah.
1998 Unreal Tournament.
That makes sense. Yep. Any other questions?
I was gonna say, you're talking about the rollback to a game state on lag. So is that like, you lose packets, and so the server resets your position for others? Is that like rubber banding that you experience?
Yeah, you will experience rubber banding, but because your input is what's being synced across the network, they won't see it because they're just receiving your inputs.
The packets that did make it,
right,
which could be missing the W key.
Yeah, or like, and also the server will do interpolation and like, say that you're probably hitting the W key, and will tell everybody else that you're hitting the W key even though you didn't.
It's like between frames 5 and 10. I mean, he was holding W key at frame
I
5,
do know
and he was
that-
holding at frame 10. Who cares?
I do know that it'll like fill in the blanks in some cases.
Yeah, it's magic, dude. I don't know.
It really is. From what I've heard about it.
Yeah.
So would that be necessary rollbacks for local play?
So like,
Because like GSW or Game Studio Workshop is making a 2D fighting game. Would you suggest we try to implement rollback?
what engine are you using?
Unity.
The only solution that I know, because me and Jeffrey Guerrero have done so much research into how to possibly do rollback in Unity, and the only thing that we found is Quantum. But I'll be honest, because like, I've messed with it a little bit. I'm still learning, but it's pretty big.
Yeah, if you're doing it local,
Yeah.
yeah, if you're doing it local,
If you're doing local, you're fine. But if you're wanting to do multiplayer with rollback, it's kind of hard. But like it's not required for fighting games. Like you can use other networking solutions. It's just because it's relatively new, right? Like the concept of rollback in fighting games, like within the last 10 years. So like a lot of fighting games that are networked use this same concepts for it. But if you're just doing local, you don't need it. You're fine.
I just suddenly remembered, and you're talking about malicious mages. I keep forgetting that malicious mages was never online. We would always fake my connection to your computer, so I would be using your computer at the same time you're using your computer through a parsec.
Yeah.
So
We
playing locally.
We used a tool called Parsec, which allows people to tunnel into your computer to play local games as if they were multiplayer. And I don't know why we kept doing that. It's like, we'll add multiplayer after. No. Just do it. Add the multiplayer first. It's important.
So could I use? You talked about Steam. Not letting you have like multiple accounts on one computer. Could I use a virtual machine to like that?
I haven't tried it, but maybe. As long as they can connect to each other. Yeah. It's just it's cumbersome. So cumbersome.
Issue with your graphics. Virtual machine is normally FBC to do graphics. So there is a way around it, but it's a headache.
Yeah.
So use Docker.
Anybody else?
there is a very solid perchance.
Perchance, try it. Let me know.
Probably just,
Piece of 2D game right away.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Try and connect.
Thank you, guys. I have been Tomas Abrams. You can find me on most platforms with the tag @BizarreFog, Twitter, X, Instagram, etc. So, thank you.
Thank you.